world is a hungry place, a dangerous place.
How did you actually find it back then?
I found it so boring back then.
That scene from The Shining is a fantastic scene. It's one of the most iconic scenes of the entire movie. What were your thoughts overall of the movie?
So I think... Hello and welcome back to another episode of Lights Camera Podcast. This is the podcast where we discuss and analyse different movies. And as you can see, we've upgraded a little bit. We've got some new equipment, finally.
Yes. Yeah.
Only took us a few episodes, but thankfully we got there anyway.
Even though we're still kind of struggling.
Yeah, it took us like 2 hours to figure out how to work them or anything. But yes, I'm Zain. This is
Ramzan.
So Ramzan, tell me, how have you been?
Yeah, I've been good. I've just basically just started my ITU placement, CCU and anaesthetics.
What does that mean?
So it's basically intensive treatment unit. But actually I'm technically on the general ICU. It's not really my thing, to be honest. I do find it a little bit dull. But I suppose it's a new experience, and it's still important to kind of get what you can out of it. So
I just finished my ICU/ITU placement.
How did you find it?
Well, I was there for 5 weeks, and it does get pretty repetitive.
Yeah.
Especially since you're seeing kind of the same sort of things every day, and it's very complex.
Yeah.
It is good for learning, I guess, because a lot of these patients have quite multi-organ conditions, and it's about looking at the patient as a whole.
Yeah.
And you'll see medications being used in ITU and ICU that you won't see in other places. And for example, patients in ICU are intubated, whereas most other places in the hospital that isn't the case.
Yeah, that's true.
So it's interesting from that perspective, but you're right, it isn't what it does get stale quite quickly.
Yeah.
That was my experience anyway. But now I'm in GP land, which is again not really my thing.
Okay.
But just started, so we'll see how it goes. It'd be interesting to compare doing GP than doing it in our first clinical year 3 years ago.
Yeah, definitely. How did you actually find it back then?
I found it so boring back then. But I think even just from one clinic today, it's definitely, I'm hoping it's going to be better, just because I think back then I didn't know anything. So
yeah.
When you don't know anything and the conversations are just happening around you, you just zone out.
Yeah, definitely.
Whereas now, at least you have an idea as to what's going on. And so, you can, after the patient leaves or whatever, you could talk to the GP a little bit and learn that way.
Good. Well, it's good to hear that at least the first day was good.
It wasn't a disaster.
Yeah, but if you listen in next time, then you can perhaps find out about whether Zain continues to have a good time on his GP placement.
Or if Ramzan's ICU placement improves or not.
At the moment, I'm not too convinced, but we'll see. Anyway, so on to the topic of this week.
So
Do you want to intro?
So this week we went and watched the movie Dr. Sleep, and which is a sequel to Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. I'm not actually sure if it's a separate book or if it's a continuation of the same story in the same book.
It's a separate book.
Yeah,
it was actually released in 2013.
Oh wow, so it's very recent. Okay.
Yeah.
Obviously by Stephen King. So Ramzan, why don't you tell us about Dr. Sleep?
Okay, yes. So let me just get out my notes here. Okay, yeah. So essentially, Dr. Sleep is like a follow-on from The Shining. And for those who don't know, a quick summary of The Shining. So The Shining is a really famous book and movie done by Stanley Kubrick in about filmed in 1980. And the base of that plot is basically you have Jack Nicholson, who takes his family up to a hotel, and the movie basically sees the course of him kind of losing his mind, so to speak, and eventually it culminates in him trying to kill his own family, but he ultimately dies in the snow outside in the hotel. And during the film we also see how Jack's son, Danny, is also introduced by one of the cooks at the Overlook Hotel, that he has something called the Shining. And the Shining is basically kind of an ability or psychic ability to do a few things. So he can kind of read other people's minds, talk through people's minds, preempt things, and also kind of communicate with otherworldly events and stuff like that. Essentially a range of powers. So so Doctor Sleep carries on from that, and essentially the movie kind of starts off with Danny shown to be kind of quite traumatized after his experience at the Overlook, and then it kind of forwards on until the present day. I think it's 2011, and essentially again the film in summary sees Dan as an adult starting off as being this kind of alcoholic loser type character who's seems to be kind of going down the same way as his father, but gets his life together, moves to a new town, gets a job, which we'll talk about later, and essentially pairs up with someone, a young child who also has the Shining, and they take on a group of essentially like vampires who are called True Knot, and ultimately, again, there's a spoiler alert. Ultimately, what happens is they kind of battle, and it ends with, and major spoiler alert, Dan dying in the Overlook Hotel, and the girl who's called Abra ultimately surviving. So that's kind of a very brief, hopefully up to your standard summary. So yeah, that would be my summary. And what were your thoughts overall of the movie?
So I think overall, firstly, the first thing I'd want to say is that I think it's unfair to compare this movie directly to The Shining. I think it's very different in so many regards. Firstly, structurally, I think it's very different, where The Shining is like a character study of Jack, as you said, like his descent into madness.
Yeah.
Whereas, and that's like, so that's the focus, whereas the plot is kind of not a central thing, is very secondary.
Yes.
Whereas in this movie, the main thing is the plot.
Yeah.
And The Shining, despite its name, the actual power of The Shining takes a much more center role in this movie compared to The Shining.
Yes. Yeah.
It's much bigger of a focus, whereas in the original movie, it's kind of like an afterthought, or like it's a secondary thing.
Yeah.
And I think you only ever see it actually being used once or twice.
Yes.
The one that comes to mind is from I think his name's Doc or Dick. The guard.
Dick Halloran. Yeah.
He
the cook.
When Jack is trying to kill his family, he you see him like sit up in his bed, and he obviously goes to try and save them. But yeah, so to get back to your question, what did I think about the movie? I generally enjoyed this movie. I think I tried not to go in with too high expectations, I guess, just because trying to live up to a Stanley Kubrick movie is very, very difficult. It's not attainable at all, to be honest, in most regards. But so I just kind of went in with a blank slate, seeing it as its own thing.
Yes.
And as a standalone thing, I thought it was decent. I thought it was okay. I wasn't blown away, but I thought it was an enjoyable movie.
So has your view changed from when you came out the cinema? So basically, we watched the movie in the cinema was it Wimbledon, I think?
Yeah, I think so.
And I remember when the movie finished, you seemed very much enthused by it. Has your view kind of increased of it or decreased, or is it kind of the same? Because you seem quite enthusiastic after the movie.
I think, yeah, it's probably, I probably was a bit hyped after it.
Yeah.
I think I've sitting with it for a while. It's like, it's not, I'm not like, I haven't completely changed my mind and I'm like, oh, it's a horrible movie, but I think I've just, in putting it into perspective, it's an okay movie. It's a decent movie.
Yeah.
As opposed to, not that I came out of it thinking it was fantastic. I definitely recognise its flaws, but yeah, I would say on repeat viewings, I wouldn't enjoy it as much as I did on its first viewing, I think.
Yeah.
And the cinema experience itself is like a really good, like a good way to view it.
Is it a film you would watch again?
If this, I wouldn't avoid watching it again. I wouldn't necessarily choose to watch it again on my own.
Yeah.
I feel like I got everything out of the first viewing that I needed to get out of it.
Yeah.
If, let's say, for example, it was something I felt someone else would enjoy, and I wanted to show it to them, then I would probably be okay with sitting through watching it again.
Okay.
What about you?
I would kind of agree with you. It's a film which more I would watch again with someone else who has seen The Shining to kind of experience. It's kind of like when you get enjoyment out of seeing someone else's experience of watching a movie, kind of like when you watch a really good movie and you want to show your family, basically. But yeah, I would echo what you've said, that it's not a movie I would go out my way to watch again. But perhaps, I don't know, maybe in a few months or something, I might want to just rewatch it again to see if my views have changed.
I think it was okay. What were the things you enjoyed about the movie in general?
So there's like a few points which I did like. So firstly was I did feel that the movie brought together The Shining and this movie in the way they melded them together, in terms of allowing a degree of continuity between the movies that flowed nicely. I think they achieved that because because they actually have a double task here. Firstly, it's linking the book to the two books together, because The Shining is obviously originally a book. Doctor Sleep is actually a book, and also linking it to The Shining, the movie by Stanley Kubrick. And I felt that it didn't feel at any time like I was in a different world. I could understand watching the movie and relate to that old Dan being the Danny that we knew in The Shining, if that makes sense. Yeah. So I didn't feel like that took me out of the whole experience. Okay, yeah, so as I was saying, a second reason why I did really like this movie was I did quite like the evil characters in it, so they're called like True Not, and especially one that I liked was kind of how Abra and Dan kind of battled against Rose. So Rose was obviously the leader of the True Not, the gang, and how Rose kind of entered into Abra's dream or mind, which was really interesting. And then eventually also at the end, how Abra and Dan, they basically put like a projection of Astra in the forest, and then they basically just snipe all the True Not people. And I thought that was really clever. I thought it was not something I was expecting. It was very different, and it really, for me, it was kind of the right level of it was the right level of kind of what's it called, like fantasy horror type level of fantasy to go to for this horror. But there were other parts which I thought maybe went a bit too far. But were there any things that you didn't like about the movie?
So initially, actually, the villains is one of the things I didn't like.
Yeah.
I thought initially they were more boring. No, sorry, they were more annoying. Than evil.
Yeah.
Up until they kill Baseball Boy.
Yeah.
Or the Baseball Boy. That's when I really realized that it really showed them as like how evil they can be.
Yeah.
Or what they're capable of.
Yeah.
But up until that point, they were just kind of goofy and a bit like quirky and just weird.
Yeah.
Especially compared to Jack Nicholson in The Shining. I know I said at the start it's difficult. You shouldn't compare this movie, but comparing villain to villain, it's a much inferior villain.
Yeah.
Or antagonist to have. The other thing I didn't really like was I felt in the first act they were kind of boring, but then it picked up. The other thing I didn't like was kind of at the end of the movie. I felt it became kind of too self-indulgent in references to The Shining.
Yeah.
Like throughout the movie there were parts of it, like there were parts that were done well. So for example, at the start of the movie, when you see young Danny and you have like the trailing shot of him on his little
scooter,
tricycle. That was very Stanley Kubrick-esque, and also the shot of when they're going to the hotel.
Yeah, that was really good. Yeah,
like it was kind of references back, but it was done in a good way.
Yeah,
or like in a tasteful way. But at the end, it just got like too much. Like for example, when Danny is chasing the girl. Abra through the hotel with an axe. It was kind of like like Jack Nicholson.
And
in The
also
Shining.
the stairs. I felt like the scene on the stairs.
Yeah.
I didn't like it because I thought that scene from The Shining is this fantastic scene. It's one of the most iconic scenes of the entire movie. And I just thought that it felt very forced. It started feeling a bit forced in the references back to The Shining.
I thought the most egregious one was the elevators with the blood.
Oh yeah.
That almost felt like a parody, the way it
Yeah.
was done, because it was the elevator's open and the blood pours out in slow motion. But when you cut back to what's her name, the woman, the evil woman, she's like looking at it in normal motion, and it keeps cutting back, and it just felt very strange. It felt very forced.
Yeah.
But up until that point, it was done well. And I think one thing that was done well was the music, the score.
Oh yeah.
Like it had this very similar, like the sounds that they kind of use in The Shining. And when it was used here, it was done really well. It added to the atmosphere, whereas felt like it was being forced into it.
Okay.
In a way that the things at the end were done.
Yeah, I think the score was. I think it didn't leap out at me, but it definitely wasn't. I didn't find it definitely didn't find it bad.
Yeah, but did you not recognize? When they're going up the mountain?
Yeah, that was the original score. Yeah, that was good.
Stuff like that, or like their little tinkering noise that they do at certain points.
Yeah, that was. Oh, another thing I didn't like was how they kept putting the heartbeat in all the time.
The heartbeat.
Do you remember that? There was a lot of times they just put in the heartbeat, like a sound of heartbeat.
I remember they did it with the breathing noise. You remember when the
she's
antagonist
flying over.
is flying?
Yeah, they did a lot of heartbeat sounds.
I don't remember that in particular.
Yeah, I remember.
At what points?
Quite a bit. So it was. I kept. For example, like when Danny was walking to the bathroom when he arrived in the city for the first time, they were doing it a lot because I remember I just thought they were adding it in unnecessarily, like to add tension, but it didn't really lead to anything.
Yeah.
And it's another thing I thought about the movie that I didn't really feel it had a proper. I felt it was more of like an action horror than actual horror.
Yeah, that's true. It wasn't a true horror movie.
It wasn't a true horror movie, and that's kind of what I was expecting because I feel The Shining is more of a true horror movie.
This is more supernatural fantasy horror.
Yeah, and I actually felt the supernatural component, sometimes they pushed it a bit farther. It felt unrealistic. So, for example, for me is when the granddad in True Knot was dying and Rose gives off like this big speech about how he was alive in the Colosseum and all this type of thing. And I was just like, it just seems too over the top.
Yeah. I kind of like that. I just felt...
I like the idea of it, but I just thought the way it was done, it felt... I don't know. I like the idea he'd been alive for a long time.
Yeah.
But it seemed to me... It took me a bit out of it because it felt very dramatic and over the top rather than like something that felt a bit more realistic that he'd been alive, let's say 500 years, but instead it was like he'd been around for like 2,000, 3,000 years.
Oh, it felt like the amount of time was too much.
Yeah, the amount of time was too much. And from what she was saying as well, it felt quite cliche, like oh, you were with emperors and all this type of thing.
Fair enough, I see that point. I think it also would have had more an effect if we had actually established that character a bit more.
Yeah,
we knew of him, but we never learned anything about him.
Exactly, and that's a point about all of the villains. Really, I felt like we didn't really understand any of them.
Besides, obviously, the main one.
Yeah, besides the main one.
Girl.
The girl who I didn't feel was developed much either.
Really?
Yeah.
She got more than the others, I guess.
She got more than the others. But another thing is, especially in the beginning, I thought there was a lot of jumping around. There was a lot of cutting between the people. It was really quick. You'd see Dan for a bit, then you'd see Abra, then you'd see True Knot, and it would be like... And I really didn't like that because it doesn't build tension very well. Whereas, for example, The Shining and other horror movies, they tend to have scenes which are quite long. So if you look at other movies, such as The Shining or It, even if it's not like the same cut, it's the same setting, and you'll have like not as many jumps between moments in that because it builds things up. Whereas I felt like this constant cutting between different time periods and the different people, it didn't lead to like a nice build up. For example, which we saw again, I know I keep mentioning, but like Midsummer, I felt like the tension in that movie they did really well, because I felt like the scenes were quite long and it built up over time. Do you see what I mean? It was not like
Just never
jumping
went
really
anywhere.
far ahead. It just never went anywhere. But I did think that the movie, that movie did that very well, because I felt a lot of tension during the movie, expecting something to happen.
Yeah.
This movie, I didn't really feel it.
Fair enough. I do think the first act was quite dull.
Yeah.
And that's probably a contributing factor to it. And I do think, none of the villains were really fully established.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think what things I did like about the movie, because I think I haven't mentioned that bit yet.
Yeah.
But and it's the reason why I think I came out of it with such a positive views, because it's what I remembered, and it's what was most apparent. Whereas the other negatives are things you think about after you sat with it.
Yeah.
But firstly, I think the visuals were done really well in terms of how they show how the Shining actually works.
Yeah.
So the ones that I remember in particular is, like, for example, when Abra sees through the villain's eyes, like how she grabs onto her window and it pulls her back and she flies
Yeah,
back.
yeah, that was good.
That was really, really cool the way they did that. Or when how the villain is flying in the air to get to Abra's house.
That scene was really good.
Yeah, like those things really stood out to me, and it was a very creative way to put into, I guess, context this kind of abstract power of The Shining.
Yeah, exactly. That's true.
And like that mixed with the sound design was done really well.
Yeah.
Those are two, I think, big things. And also just in general, the shots. Like there were a lot of, I think, very different abstract creative shots that were used in the movie. And that also, helped to give this kind of eerie, strange atmosphere.
Yeah, I would agree. There's one scene where you see Rose like entering into Abra's house, and the camera like turns upside down, and she like goes like this and goes in. Yeah. And I thought that was really good. It's like these types of ones which make you feel a bit discombobulated or disorientated. And I just wish they had more of that in the movie. I feel like I agree. But yeah, I think it was I would agree with it's definitely difficult to kind of put across a force like The Shining, and I think they did that well.
Do you know what this movie is similar to in terms of structure?
What?
Logan?
You think so?
Do you think? 'Cause
really?
It's a man who's has to look after this little girl from people who are trying to use her powers.
Yeah, yeah.
And he has to protect her, but he's also like faulted in himself.
Yeah.
There's a few movies that have that kind of structure.
Yeah.
Logan, I think, is one of them. There's a movie called Children of Men. And there's one with I've got it written down. There's one with there's one called Mercury Rising. It's a really old movie. I think it's from the 90s. And that's like there's like this autistic child, and Bruce Willis is the guy who has to try and protect him. So there's a lot of movies that have this structure of like this child that has to be protected by someone, but they have their own flaws, blah blah blah.
Yeah, that's quite interesting.
Yeah.
That's quite interesting.
But I literally, as soon as I saw the movie, I was like, that was very similar to Logan.
Yeah,
I thought that kind of straight away.
But I think Logan was much better.
Oh yeah, 100. It did it way better in terms of that kind of story.
Because going into Logan, you have different expectations.
Absolutely, yeah.
We went into expecting a horror movie.
Yeah.
And I didn't feel that the horror component was delivered as well as it.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned it's more like it's like an action movie. I would say it's very much like a superhero movie.
Yeah.
Because there's this power that they have, and obviously different people are either using it for good or they're using it for evil.
Yeah.
And I guess maybe the thought process was superhero movies are bigger right now. Let's try and capitalize on that a little bit.
Yeah, and I think it's that as a director, you're gonna be very wary of not copying the same movie. And I think it's very difficult. I know definitely watching it, I was hoping more of, a movie that lived up to The Shining in the sense that, very different type of camera work, very innovative way of recording. So I think I tried to kind of, that's why when I left the movie, I felt not as satisfied. But on reflection, that you can't do that. You can't just rehash the same movie.
Exactly, yeah.
And I did think he did a good job in what I mentioned earlier in the continuity. It did feel like it was an extension to the movie that was genuine. as in I could actually imagine it. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what did you when you saw it? Because I felt a bit it felt a bit strange seeing different actors playing those same characters. Into obviously you're gonna have a different person playing older
Oh,
Jack,
yeah.
older Danny, but when you see younger Danny, and especially Wendy,
Yeah.
seeing someone else play her just seemed really strange.
Yeah,
Because I
it-
thought Shelley Duvall, who played her in the original, did such an amazing job
Yeah.
with that performance that you couldn't really live up to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just felt that the person who did it in this movie was kind of just doing an impression of her.
Yeah.
And there was even a second where you see someone playing Jack Nicholson's character,
Oh yeah.
and
Yeah.
that
yeah.
just
At
felt
the
really
bar.
strange.
Yeah.
No, I mean the bar. I like. What did you think of the bar scene?
I know. I did like it.
Yeah, because
I
that was just CGI, I think.
Oh really?
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. No, that I think was good because it was like that was a component where it felt like he's facing his father and he's making the same decision. In essentially, he could become the same as his father, but he decides not to. And
Yeah.
in that way, that kind of cycle is broken.
Yeah.
Yeah.
no, exactly. For the same reasons, I really like that scene. Yeah, him facing this kind of this demon that he's always had to live with,
Yeah.
but with his father and the alcoholism,
Yeah.
and that kind of was a very real moment in an otherwise very supernatural movie.
Yeah. It was a slower moment of like within the chaos, this kind of slower moment, which touches on that. Yeah. So, what would your, because obviously, time reasons, what would be your kind of takeaway thoughts from the movie, and what would you rate it out of 10?
My takeaway thoughts. So I think I would say that I didn't go into this movie with super high expectations, and that was on purpose. When I first saw the trailer, I was kind of hyped for it. But after that, when we made the decision to go and watch it, I was like, okay, don't go in with super high expectations. Don't expect a breakthrough in filmmaking like The Shining.
Yeah.
That's not what this is. I don't think it was aiming to be. So I was overall enjoyed the movie. It's not one that I feel I need to watch too many times again. It's a one hit kind of thing. And my overall rating for it, I'd probably, from the visuals alone, I think I'd give it, because of the visuals, I'd give it a 6.5. I think without that level of ingenuity and that creativeness, it would probably be lower. It might be a 5.5 or a 6. But for that, I'm going to give it a 6.5. What about you?
Okay. Yeah, I would say kind of overall, I liked like I said already, the continuity of the movie. I liked some of the components of the story and the way The Shining was put across. So, but I just didn't feel very engaged in the movie as much as I wanted to be, nor with the characters. So I would say overall, probably maybe just a 6 out of
Just a
10.
6.
Like just hitting a 6.
Yeah.
So
C minus.
yeah. So yeah, but I did, in watching the film, I did get some enjoyment out of it. It wasn't like I went to the cinema and left feeling really bad or anything. I did enjoy watching it.
It wasn't another Cars.
Yeah, no, it wasn't Cars. Oh God, Cars or Inside Out, even worse. So yeah, I think that's it for this episode.
Yep.
So yeah, do you want to sign us off?
I'll sign us off. So thank you very much for watching this episode of Lights Camera Podcast. Hope you enjoyed. Feel free to comment if there's any movies you think we should watch and analyze. Do let us know. Otherwise, we'll see you in the next one.
Thank you.